Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this first work session to order on AO 2020-86 and AO 2020-100 regarding a rezone and amendment to the Anchorage 2040 land use plan map for the Adamsville subdivision. Let's go ahead and start with a roll call.
Miss Allard? Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Miss Kennedy?
Here.
Miss LaFrance?
Here.
Mr. Presverdia? Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Miss Quinn Davidson?
Here.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Ms. Zolotel? All right, Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. As usual, if assembly members need to get in the queue, please put yourself in the chat, or if you can't access the chat, text me. So for today's work session, again, this is, as I noted at the beginning, the first work session. We'll have a second one if we need to. And so for today, we're going to hear from planning. We'll start with them. They will have a presentation. Then we will give equal time to the applicant, and they will either have a presentation or just speak with us. Then we're going to hear briefly from Mr. Gates, Assembly Counsel, who will advise us a little bit on the process here. And then from there, we can go into any further discussion. And if members are interested, hear from any neighbors if they are have joined us as well. So let's go ahead and start with planning.
All right, good morning, Assembly. This is Ryan Yell with the Planning Department. I do have a PowerPoint presentation. I just wanted to first ask your permission if I could share my screen, please.
Yeah, I think you should be able to share it.
All right, thank you. All right, everybody see the PowerPoint in front of them?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair Rivera, on the introduction. So I apologize, I do have the former name for the rezone request on here, the AIM. I wasn't sure exactly what the AO number would be today, but we are here to discuss the Arcticorp comp plan amendment and the rezone request. And to start out with, I just wanted to go over some of the statements of misinformation that was on the September 15th meeting. There was one statement, is this request due to some glitch in the code? And I want to be very clear that it is not due to a glitch in the code. The reason this request is before you is we do have a section of code that allows an applicant to forward their request directly to the assembly, even if it was recommended for denial by Planning and Zoning Commission. So it gives the applicant another shot. And the second piece of misinformation is that this current R2M zoning of this site is not due to any known zoning error from the past. This parcel has been designated as residential going all the way back to the 1982 Anchorage Comprehensive Development Plan. So there's, for the last almost 40 years, the community has intended that this parcel be designated as residential and be used as such. And I also want to be very clear that it's not that the planning department could not recommend approval for these requests. It's that the planning department believes that you should not approve these requests. We strongly recommend that the assembly concur with the findings of the Planning and Zoning Commission and deny both of these requests. So the first item that is before you is the comprehensive plan amendment, and that is necessary due to the underlying residential designation of this parcel and the fact that the applicant is requesting to rezone it to commercial. So because those two contradict with each other, you have to first amend the underlying comprehensive plan so that you get rid of that discrepancy. So they did request that the 5.61 acres, which are currently designated as compact mixed residential low in the comp plan, be amended so that it goes to commercial corridor. This did go before Planning and Zoning Commission on May 11th of this year, and it was unanimously recommended for denial by Planning and Zoning Commission due to incompatibilities with underlying comprehensive plans. And the details on that were included in the Planning and Zoning Commission Resolution 2020-14, which is included in the staff packet for this item. So here you do have a screenshot of what this parcel's designation is in the 2040 Anchorage Land Use Plan. And one of the reasons for denial is due to its conflicts with the land use policies of the Anchorage 2040 Land Use Plan. And those really hinge upon the housing needs of the community, and that we want to prevent expansion of commercial districts into residential areas, and that we also want to preserve as much residential land as possible, because it's been identified for several years that we do have a housing shortage within Anchorage, and we need to really hold on to as much residential land as we possibly can. It's also been identified in other land use studies that we do have a surplus of commercial land within the Anchorage Bowl. So this goes against the needs and wants and goals of the Anchorage 2040 Land Use Plan. Here we also have another underlying comprehensive plan. This is a screenshot from the East Anchorage District Plan. And here you can see that parcel outlined in red. That's classified as medium intensity residential. The East Anchorage District Plan was just adopted just a few years ago. It went through a very intensive public involvement process. It went through several years worth of community input to get to this place before it was adopted by the Assembly. And the contradicting policy for this one, policy 1.1.14, which is review zoning requests for consistency with the comprehensive plan and the district land use map so that private development can do the following. Let's maintain a healthy balance of jobs and households, protect and stabilize existing neighborhoods, and provide land use consistent with the established housing targets in the Anchorage housing market analysis. And here we have another underlying comprehensive plan. This is Anchorage 2020. We did not have a real comprehensive land use plan map for Anchorage 2020. We just have a land use policy map. So unfortunately, we don't have a specific designation for this parcel within the 2020 land use plan, but we do have a very strong policy that would go against this comprehensive plan amendment request, and that's policy 14. And that states, and the last part of it, I think, is the most important of this policy, and it says no regulatory action under Title 21 shall result in a conversion of dwelling units or residentially zoned property into commercial or industrial uses unless consistent with an adopted plan. And here you can see that this request is not consistent. So I apologize, this is a lot of text on this particular slide, and I don't necessarily expect you to read this in a few seconds, but what this is, what you're looking at, is the approval criteria for a comprehensive plan amendment. This is a very systematic approach that the planning department uses to analyze a request for a comprehensive plan amendment. This criteria is codified. It is in Title 21. It's not just a simple policy that the planning department has put forward. So what we do is we analyze each part of this approval criteria and take a look at them individually. And then at the end of that, if we feel that any of those are not met, then we feel that that comprehensive plan amendment is not consistent or should not be approved. And in this case, we did not feel that the approval criteria had been met, and Planning and Zoning Commission agreed with that. The planning department was instructed to provide some ideas for the Assembly to consider to potentially make this request more consistent with the goals and policies of the comprehensive plans. That being said, we would throw out the idea to the Assembly that neighborhood center with a residential mixed overlay is more in line with the comprehensive plan than requesting an amendment to commercial corridor would be. Neighboring parcels to the west and south of this site also have the neighborhood center designation, so that would expand that particular district. However, it still would result in an encroachment of a commercial district into a residential area. Right, so going to the rezone request, the corresponding rezone request was to reclassify 5.61 acres of land from R2M, which is mixed residential district, to B3, which is general commercial. That was also heard at the Planning and Zoning Commission on May 11th of 2020. And this was also unanimously recommended for denial with prejudice by Planning and Zoning Commission due to incompatibilities with underlying comprehensive plans and a failure to meet the approval criteria for zoning map amendment. And the details for that denial are outlined in Planning and Zoning Commission Resolution 2020-11, which is also included in the staff packet for this item. And here, just like with the comprehensive plan amendment, we do have a very set approval criteria for a rezone request. We do analyze these one by one. If we feel that any one of them are not met, then we recommend denial for that rezone. In this case, Planning and Zoning Commission and the Planning Department both felt that the approval criteria for this request was not met. And they also felt that due to the inconsistencies and incompatible nature of this request, that they did recommend it for denial with prejudice, which would bar the applicant from applying for this exact request for a minimum of 2 years. And they felt that way because this request should be altered or should be modified in such a way that it does become in line with the comprehensive plan. And they did not want to see the same request before them again within 2 years. So that being said, again, going back, the Assembly had requested the Planning Department to prepare some ideas for special limitations for the Assembly to consider for this matter to make it more in line with the comprehensive plan. And I do have those listed here, but I do want to be very clear on this, that the Planning Department does not support these special limitations. We do not support this rezone request. However, the Assembly could consider the following. We do feel that a rezone to the B1B instead of the B3 would perhaps be more consistent with the comprehensive plan. And we do feel that the following special limitations could be considered as a starting point for that negotiation to see how we get to a more consistent request. And our land use capacity maps have demonstrated that this parcel, this 5.61 acres, is capable of supporting 38 residential dwelling units. Our goals and policies state that we can't loss of residential land, and that a major site plan review shall be required prior to the issuance of a land use permit for the construction of any new structure, excluding accessory structures, and a phase site plan showing the development and retention of sufficient land to accommodate the development of 38 residential dwelling units shall be submitted to the Planning Department as part of this review. We do feel that a special limitation along those lines is necessary because we do not want any loss of residential land or capacity of this parcel to support the intended number of residential dwelling units on this site. And having a major site plan review would allow for another public process to take place and another Planning Department review to take place prior to development of this parcel to ensure that those residential units are maintained and withheld. In addition to that, we do feel a major site plan review would be necessary because we are altering this site in such a way, or I should say the Assembly would be altering this site in such a way that it takes such a far departure from the comprehensive plan that we want another public involvement process to take place to ensure that this is still in line with the community's goals and policies. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over to Director McNulty if she has anything further to add.
Thanks, Ryan. I think you did a great job. I have nothing to add, and we look forward to any questions that the Assembly has.
Great, thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions from the members? Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess the fundamental question here is the applicant wants to put in a storage yard, and the planning has recommended perhaps B1B, or there was another description in one of the earlier slides. If you could go back to a few slides, I didn't get a chance to write it down. There it is, neighborhood center with residential mixed use overlay. So do either of those categorizations allow for the construction of a storage yard?
Through the chair, this is Raniel with the Planning Department. Yes, B1B does allow for the construction of a self-storage facility. However, one thing I would really like to point out and make very clear to the Assembly is that this is a rezone case that is before you. You do not have a site plan review in front of you. So although the applicant intends for this to be a self-storage facility, that may not be what gets developed. You could have something that looks very different. So that is all. Thank you.
Sure.
This is Director McNulty. I'd like to just make one clarification. So the B1 A that is being recommended for zoning, that's a zoning district. This neighborhood center with residential mixed use overlay, this is a land use designation. So this would be the proposed land use designation change that would correspond with that zoning district.
Okay. Do we have to, so just a technical question then, do you have to do both of those things simultaneously? Could you just do one or the other?
No, and you actually have to amend the comprehensive plan first, because one of the approval criteria of a rezone is it cannot be in conflict with the comprehensive plan. And currently, whether the rezone goes to B1A or B3, both of those are in conflict with the current land use designation.
I'm sorry, is it B1B or B1A?
That'd be B1B.
Thank
Bravo
you.
1 Bravo.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was mentioned a while back that we have a surplus of commercial land. So when we say we have a surplus of commercial land, is that developable and available commercial land, or is this already developed commercial land? What exactly do we mean when we have a surplus of commercial? Thanks.
So through the chair, this is Ryan Yell again with the Planning Department. That is based upon an analysis of the available land. So you take the total amount of land and how those zoning districts are distributed, and based upon several different metrics, population, needs and wants, the amount of residential land available. I mean, all of that gets factored in. I'm simplifying here quite a bit, but that is solely based on the amount of available land, not necessarily whether there's a structure on that parcel currently or whether it's a vacant parcel. It's strictly just looking at the amount of B3 or B1B or B1A that's available.
Okay, so it's more a reference to what's been zoned commercial, not necessarily what could be available to build on, correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Thanks. So Ryan, well, just a little predicate. I have clear memory of a promise that was made and then not kept from a zoning conversation to an actual site plan. So With that in mind, you intimated that other uses may occur, but you didn't give any kind of general kind of ideas of what that might be. So we talk about the possibility of a storage yard, but this isn't that process. This is the zoning process. It could also be. Could you explore with us some of those other potential uses that might occur there should this proceed and not end up being a storage unit?
Through the chair, Assemblymember Constant, I definitely can do that. It is quite a lengthy list, so I'm not sure how much time you do want me to devote towards that. But I could perhaps provide that in writing later. But just as of now, things like club, lodge, meeting hall, amusement establishment, movie theater, theater company or dinner theater, restaurants, banks, offices, even funeral and mortuary services, convenience store, gas station. There's a number of them, and I can provide that as a list to the assembly if they would like.
Sure, that would be a great list to have. And just quick follow-up, what comes to mind is like Fire Island in South Addition. Do you by chance off the top of your head know how that was zoned?
That I do not off the top of my head, but I can check on that.
Yeah, I just know that at the time there were a number of folks who were very hesitant and objected to that, but now the neighbors would kill you and cut you if you tried to take it from them. So I wonder if there are some uses that might be compatible with that. So thank you for that list when you get it to us.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have my own question. I also have a question from Ms. Zolotel that she gave me before the hearing started, if that's okay. So I want to start this by saying it feels good to get back to our roots, just long debates about rezones as opposed to some of the stuff that's happened in the last few months. So it's good to get back into this kind of work. So my question is for Ryan. You mentioned that this has been zoned residential and it's always been residential in the plans, but it's a roller rink, right? And it has been a roller rink for a very long time. And I believe that's the only thing that's on that property. I haven't walked the property. But can you explain to me how that happened? And do we have something that says that roller rinks are residential?
So through the chair, that first land use designation that I mentioned was the 1982 Anchorage Comprehensive Development Plan. And I believe the roller rink was already constructed at that point. So I am making several assumptions here, but I would assume that when that comprehensive plan was developed in 1982 and discussed, that there was a need and a want from the community that since it was such a large parcel and there was a need for residential land, that remain as residential or be converted to residential. I cannot tell you off the top of my head when exactly that was zoned to R2M. It definitely predated the 1982 Comprehensive Development Plan. And also, as a follow-up, there is nothing residential about a roller rink. As you know, it'd be an amusement establishment in code, which is a commercial use. There is no residential use on that whatsoever.
Thank you. And yeah, I guess I would know from my colleagues that it might be zoned residential, but it has had a commercial use for that neighborhood for literally decades, and it is thought of as a commercial property by the neighborhood, even though it isn't, of course. So the question from Ms. Zolotel, and I'm just going to read the text she sent me. It says, the code says rezone special limitations can be placed based on the building and physical characteristics. Is a use limitation possible, and if so, how restrictive could it be? Is eliminating several B3 uses or identifying a small number as permissible? And what would the restriction, would the restriction run with the land? Finally, what is the standard we need to apply to be able to apply a use restriction if allowed?
So through the chair, you can definitely restrict uses when you are placing a special limitation. We did look over that briefly in our internal discussions about possible suggestions for special limitations. The more, I hate to call them nuisance uses, but the uses that tend to have more adverse impacts on the community within the B1B tend to either require a major site plan review or a conditional use approval, which is another public process. So our initial thoughts were that to sort of have faith in that public process that would take place, and if the community had any issue with those potentially adverse impacts or adverse uses going in, that then they would voice their opinion at that time. As far as how restrictive you can get with those, restricting those uses or devoting a certain percentage of the site that can't have certain uses, I guess I would defer to Dean on his interpretation of what you're allowed, or how restrictive or how you're allowed to sort of manipulate those special limitations.
Thank you.
Mr. Gates, did you want to respond to that now or later when I give you some time? Okay, not hearing from Mr. Gates, we'll go ahead and move on. We'll hear from Mr. Gates after we hear from the applicants.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah,
Gates.
sorry, I'm multitasking to meet a noon deadline. What was the question?
Actually, Mr. Dunbar, can you do me a favor? Can you put the question in the chat so that Mr. Gates can get a chance to review and think on it, and then we'll come to him after the applicant.
Sure.
So we're going to go ahead and move on to the applicant. So are you here with us, sir? And
Mr. Chair, I do see a couple people on mute who have called in.
yes. Yeah, so if the applicant is one of these phone numbers, it is *6 to unmute yourself. Okay, I see someone unmuted themselves. Are you the applicant, sir?
Yes. Ken Fuller.
Great.
Joe Fuller, Arcticorp here.
Great. So I'm assuming because you're on the phone that you don't have a physical presentation, so it'll just be a verbal presentation. So go ahead, sir.
Right. Yeah, we were not able to link in for whatever reason. Anyway, yes, we certainly appreciate all you guys' time and effort and going over this process, this procedure. And we've been babying this for over a year now. And we appreciate it as far as it's come, and we hope to complete it. Once again, going back to the original application, this has been a roller rink since 1970. Was the doors were open, and this is a 20,000 square foot facility on a 5-acre lot. It was one of the I think 2 east-west corridors back in the day when it opened, and it's been a facility of business for all that time. When zoning did come about, there had to be an error, and the 2040 plan specifically talks about correcting these old errors. The East Plan 80, I remember what 82 or no 14 called for also wanting to synchronize the actual uses with the zoning because there's lots of these little inaccuracies over the whole east side, because I suspect what happened is they said, okay, well, all that area is going to be our residential R2M, and they never bothered to carve out the ones that were at that time even being used. Subsequently, our neighbor next door to the west of us got a B1A zone, and there's 22 businesses right there, and that's been there since the 80s. And across the street is multiple commercial endeavors, church, daycare, security, flower shop, gas. Well, it was a gas station in the past. It's going to be a gas station again. I think that Chevron still owns that lot. Next to us is a bus garage, a daycare, a church, a dentist office, a chiropractor office. Down the street the other way is a plumbing supply house. And so this little residential area is 39 businesses, okay, and has been for many, many, many years. And this does not change what the use and nature of this lot has been for 50 years. It's actually probably a less demanded on the facilities as far as sewer, water, traffic, refuse. All that stuff will be significantly less because the only thing less traffic is probably a cemetery, okay? Because once people put it in, they come and get it as they need to, but other than maybe swapping out your summer for your winter or Christmas stuff, it's pretty low intensity use. And so it's very positive for the community. We've talked to all the people in that area. You can see in the packet there's 100+ signatures of people who we made this presentation to and gave them the opportunity to select A, B, or C. A was all the storage, B was storage with the retail front, and C was a multifamily. And I don't think the only one that selected multifamily was one of the businesses in the park wanted to use the parking that he saw would be left over from a multifamily situation. Anyhow, so we went and met with planning and zoning, and all the departments other than long-range planning, which are within their designation, none of them objected other than long-range planning, and long-range planning had to object because built into their requirements is a planning, a long-range planning, a growth factor, okay? And based on their growth factor at this point in time, we should be at 317,000 plus population. But according to World Population Review, we're at 285,000. We've lost 1% per year of population on average the last 7 years. And so the fact somebody saying we're shortage on housing units, I don't see how that's even theoretically possible, assuming that we did at one time had 301,000 population, because you've reduced the population by 15,000. If you only did three people per dwelling unit, you're down at least 5,000 or 6,000 residential occupancy places. So, and actually, I don't want to dispute them, but they're restricted in their regulation of what the long range has to do. The rest of the departments, traffic and fire and water and all the others had no objection or approved. Another area that specifically when they responded to our application, they have like 9 points of criteria. And number one was the rezoning shall be in the best interest of the citizens of Anchorage and shall promote the public health, safety, and general welfare. I thought for sure that we met that criteria. And their objection to that was that they would be missing out on 84 units sometime in the future, somewhere after 2030 or 2040, because based on the current population and the future growth, it's not there. Anyway, so that's one of the criteria that said we did not meet, but the public needs, the safety and general welfare, that storage facility hits every one of those. The number two complies with and conforms to the comprehensive plan. Criteria is not met. Once again, they refer to these 84 units that somehow they're going to miss out on. But that's a long time to wait for maybes when the economics kicks in and allows us. Plus, within B3 or B1B, we could do residential if the demand was there and the economics provided for it. One of the good things about the storage is that it gives us a little more flexibility on that ground over a long period of time. But our specific desire and purpose at this point is to be a storage facility. We have 3 other ones in town that are equal in size or greater. And one of ours is just turning 50 years old this year, and I don't see where we're going to change it for the next 50 years. So once this gets up and running, it's not going to change. Now, can I give you absolute guarantee for sure? And no, because we don't know what oil is going to do. We don't know what COVID is going to do. But our purpose and intent is to to be a storage facility, indoor 20,000 square foot indoor heated storage. By the way, there was a residence unit in that rolling rink over the years, as a side piece of information. But like I say, all the neighbors support it because it can be all fenced in. Right now, it's kind of an attractive nuisance. We even had somebody break in and start a fire inside that facility, not to burn it down, but they wanted a campfire because the heat wasn't on. But a lot of casual trespass, a lot of traffic, not only on our property, but the neighbors is joining it, and they're all supportive of having it fenced in, lighted, security measures, cameras, and cleaned up. Once again, low impact. It definitely fits the criteria to be large enough to be a rezone on its own. And also fulfills the need for the 2040 plan specifications. It's a living document, and the city needs to evolve, of course, and respond to the circumstances. Well, I think this circumstances have got a couple of demands. Number one is got to correct the error that was made 50 years ago when they somehow, in the early to mid 70s, zoning hit. Okay, and that was some kind of a blanket zone, and the guy who was running it, yeah, he had grandfather rights, so he wasn't interested in having to change it at that time, even though it's been a commercial property for 50 years. And like I say, the change we're going to do is not even add one business license. It's just another business license, different business license on the same property, which would be actually less impactful. There are some deed limits actually on the property right now that from our purchase that restrict us from alcohol or marijuana of any kind. But we certainly don't mind limitations that help assuage the fears of some negative impact there. We're totally open to limits as the city, the assembly, and the Northeast Community Council, which we had our meeting last Thursday night. There wasn't too many turned out, but they once again reaffirmed their support, and I think she may have passed on some limits that planning had given her as options to put on the project, which we had no objection with. Matter of fact, our suggestion was do B3, but limit it to B1B or B1A parameters, so in the future it's less cumbersome to have to try and deal with, because B1B or B1A limitations would already be in the code. You wouldn't have to try and deal with each one individual. But if you want to do individually, we're okay with that also. This also achieves the plans dictated in the 2040 plan to rehab and repurpose old and historic buildings. Well, I think a 50-year-old building in Anchorage is pretty historic. Okay? And out of that, our current ability to use it is limited to pretty much a snow dump site. Okay? And answer any questions that I can. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, for the purposes of equal time, I see that planning is in the queue. So planning, go ahead, and then I will give the applicant one more opportunity to speak. And then we'll see if assembly members have questions. So go ahead, Mr. Yale.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to correct some of the statements that were made. So I want to be very clear that this was not just long-range planning that had opposition to this rezone. This was the planning department. And again, it was not that we could not suggest approval, it's that we feel we should not approve this. Population projections, we studied those over decades of time, not just in the here and now. And it has been shown that we are going to have population growth over time. And with that, there's going to be a higher demand for residential units. And again, I want to point out, this is not due to a zoning error. It was even stated by the applicant that the roller rink is grandfathered in. So there was a need and a decision was made, and I cannot tell you an exact date or an AO on that, but there was a decision made that this parcel needs to be zoned residential and should be designated as residential within the comprehensive plan. Because the roller rink predated that decision, it was grandfathered in and can remain in operation until such time as it ceases operation. And I also want to point out that the applicant had stated we passed special limitations on to the Northeast Community Council. We have not done that. We have not worked with the Northeast Community Council because we do feel that this rezone request should not be considered and should not be approved, and that the Assembly should again uphold the position of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And I also want to state the applicant had mentioned that they provided 3 options during their public meeting. I'd just like to draw the attention to that in the staff packet. I can't tell you the exact page because my page numbers are different than the page numbers in front of you. But there's several pages from their community meeting that have some signatures and names of individuals and what option they would like to choose. Planning and Zoning Commission, there were a few commissioners that did believe that this type of public involvement was disingenuous for the following reasons. For option A, the pros that are listed are less demand on road, sewer, water, electric, police, and medical services. And then the negatives for and option A is solely self-storage. Option C is high density housing. And a negative that is listed for that is an eyesore and a security risk for neighbors. So we do believe that, when I say we, I'll take that back. I'll say it's my personal opinion, as well as those commissioners on the Planning and Zoning Commission. We do believe that the public involvement that was done prior to submitting this application was disingenuous. With that, I have no further comment.
Thank you. Before I turn to you, can you state your name again for the record, the applicant?
Ken Fuller?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fuller. Go ahead if you could provide a brief response, please.
Yes, Mr. Yon refers to that area was all zoned. Well, sometime in the 80s, that mall next door obviously got rezoned into a B1A zoning because it was all part of the same blanket zoning that happened back in the 70s. And it fit the criteria for being less than, I think, 2 acres. So zoning has been amended over the years out there. And as far as being disingenuous, we simply provided them the options, and they we did not try and steer them to any one option. Okay, I mean you could say that was negative information. No, I think it's more factual information. But definitely neither here nor there. Anchorage is 2,000 square miles. Okay, it's bigger than the state of Rhode Island. And to say that this little 5-acre dot in the east side, the northeast side of Anchorage, is going to be a significant detriment to the growth of Anchorage when you've got the whole hillside designated as future residential. You've got all kind of areas all the way from Girdwood to Clutna, and that aren't restricted at all in any way, shape, or form. And so there's plenty of growth. The restrictions are the diminished choosing to live in Anchorage is more based on economics, because in the valley or beyond, they could get a considerable amount more dirt with less cost and a lot less headaches from building. And so that's what they're choosing. And you can't deny the people that. I mean, the better thing to do for Anchorage, in my opinion, is putting that bridge and annex that Point McKenzie, and you double Anchorage. Sorry. Anyhow, that's my, I'd be glad to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and turn to any questions from Assembly members. Do any Assembly members have questions? All right, I'm not seeing any questions from Assembly members for the applicant. Ms. McNulty, did you have a brief comment?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, this is very brief. I just want to remind everybody that the comprehensive plan is a roadmap to ensuring that we have enough land for all the uses that we need in the future. And so sometimes we will have land that's developed that is outside of that, that comp plan or the zoning district. But when we do these analysis, we're looking at the future growth of our community and making sure we have enough for housing, jobs, industrial, everything that we need to be a strong, viable community. And every time we chip away at that, even if it's 5 acres at a time, we exacerbate all of our problems. We exacerbate our housing shortage, our land shortage, not having enough land. So I just want to remind everybody of that as you consider this rezone request. Thanks.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Gates. He had wanted to share some thoughts from a process legal perspective, as well as Mr. Gates, if you could go ahead and address Ms. Zolotov's question as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I thought first I would get to Ms. Zolotov's question, and it was typed out in the chat, so I'm going to read it out so everyone can hear what it is. So the question was, the code says rezone special limitations can be placed based on the building and physical characteristics. Is a use limitation possible? And if so, how restrictive could it be? I.e., for example, eliminating several B3 uses or identifying a small number as permissible? And would the restriction run with the land? And then finally, what is the standard we need to apply? What kind of record is needed to be able to apply a use restriction if allowed? And I'm going to go here to, well, first, use limitations. As a special limitation, they are allowed. I want to share my screen here. See. Okay, so this is a memo that I distributed a few weeks ago and that I wrote over a year ago. That's just generally about rezonings and the criteria and Assembly's role. So this isn't specific to this application or any rezone application. And this doesn't talk about comprehensive plan amendments. But this is pertinent to the question. I included code here that was relevant. And this part here in, 2103-160, it's G is about special limitations, if I may. So rezoning to special limitations. And when here it says uses of lands or structures. So yes, use limitations are possible. What you can do is you look at the permissible uses in the B3 district, because that's what they're asking to rezone to. So if it's the rezones approved to B3, and you look at the permitted uses now currently in Title 21, you can, with the special limitation, eliminate a lot of those uses or a few of them, but you cannot add additional uses that are not in Title 21 currently for the B3 district. So I think that answers the first part of the question. Let's see. That's how restrictive it could be. So you could identify just a small number of uses in B3. I think you start to get to some due process issues. If you like permit only one use in B3, you don't want to go that far. So there's sort of a rule of reasonableness here, and it sort of needs to be rationally related to why you have some rational reason for the special limitation. So that's sort of implied here and in case law. And the second part, would it run the land? Well, what happens when you do a rezone? Rezonings sometimes are small and apply to a single large parcel, or they might apply to a whole area with a number of parcels. But what happens is it's added to the official zoning map that's maintained by the planning department. So anybody that buys a parcel in future, yeah, that special limitation applies to whatever, any special limitations in that district. If they're within a zoning district with a special limitation applies to their parcel, they could not, for example, if some B3 uses are prohibited that are normally prohibited in other B3 districts, prohibited by a special limitation, well, it would apply to the parcel if it's within that rezoned area that has the special limitation. So it's not exactly the same as it runs with the land, but it's the same effect. It's just maintained by the planning department on the official zoning map rather than as a commandant attached to the deed and so forth. But the effect is the same. You know, it's applicable until changed by a future rezoning action. And then the standard to apply. Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean, but the kind of record you need is what you do here, and the Assembly's done this in the past. You have a rezone, you have the special limitation, and again, in the memorandum, you have these types here, and you have the effects, and excuse me. For a second, I thought I saw some language about the standard, never mind. Basically, you go through the process of approving the rezone and add it. And, you know, you've got the record there in your assembly meetings and this work session and so forth. And that's adequate as long as you're, what you're doing is amending the official zoning map. I hope that's sufficient. Answers the question.
Yes, that does. I think I have a question for you on that before you go on. Mr. Dunbar?
I think my question's a little bit broader, but it is for Dean and/or Michelle. I can ask it now, or if there's more for Dean, I could wait.
Okay, so Mr. Gates, did you have anything else?
Well, no, I don't really. I think that all I planned to do was point out to my memo generally, and I distributed that a few weeks ago. So in the interest of time, I don't have anything more. I'll just answer questions.
Okay, got it. Mr. Dunbar, go ahead.
Thank you, and I apologize if this is in that memo, but the planning department had suggested B1B instead of B3. So my question is, could we, through floor amendment, change this to a B1B rezone instead of a B3 rezone? Do we need to send it back to P&Z, or does it require an entirely new application?
I would defer to Dean on that.
I'm going to pull up my memo again. It's sort of in there, yes. And I'm going to say, I'm sort of off the cuff here. No, we can't do this by floor amendment. And, you know, this is based on an application to planning, and it comes to you, but it's through B3. You can't modify the application that way. I think you do, though, have these options. You know, you take one of these following actions. So one thing that you could do is remand the proposed amendment to the Planning and Zoning Commission and have them consider. I think that going back to planning and zoning, maybe they will remand to the applicant and suggest that they do a B1B instead. I'm not sure their process then, but basically you cannot do that by a floor amendment to change the whole nature of the application. And I invite Ms. McNulty or planning staff to add to that response.
This is through the chair. This is Michelle McNulty. I don't have anything to add. I agree with Dean's assessment.
Can I ask a follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
So for October 13th, when we're taking action on this, you know, one option is to remand to P&Z, but if they also lack the ability to change B3 to B1B, then it might be cleaner to just kill it. So my question is, if we remand to, if the Assembly decides to remand to planning and zoning, do they have the ability to do what we would have done and switch it from B3 to B1B?
I'm actually not quite sure about that. I would want to do a little reading before I respond, but planning staff to the Planning and Zoning Commission, perhaps they know.
Thank you.
Can I comment?
So is that, sorry, at this point, I think it would be helpful if planning staff, if they have a comment, but otherwise I do have someone else in the queue. Not hearing planning staff. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, I just want to put a little more careful edge on the language Mr. Dunbar just used. He said what we, quote, would have done if we had the power. And I would just want to ensure that everybody understands that what may be done, not what would have been done, because I have not taken a position. And so even if I were to make a vote to remand, I would probably ask the members to adopt a position that says the body takes no position on the merits or lack of merits, as opposed to prejudge the question, send it back, and ask them to find a way to adopt it. So I would just put a very careful edge on that language. It's not what the assembly would have done, but it's maybe what one person would like the assembly to do.
Thank you. So, Mr. Fuller, if you have a brief comment that you'd like to make, go ahead.
Yeah, hopefully what would be more expeditious would be if we did the B3 zone, but with B1B limits, then you accomplish both tasks without having to draw this out over another year.
Thank you. Any other discussion? So I think at this point, unless there's objection from the members, I will go ahead, because there appears to be different pathways forward. I'll go ahead and keep the second work session on the books, with the hopes that there is work done between now and then so that we have a clear path, or at least maybe multiple clear paths that we can discuss in more detail. So seeing no opposition to that, I'll go ahead and keep that on the books. Seeing no further discussion, I will go ahead and close this work session. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.